Hey everyone, my name is Devin Moreno, and I'm an investor here in the Baltimore City area. And as of right now, this recording, I have 15 houses that I actually started purchasing 4 years ago, about three and some change, but 4 years ago as of today. And this is pretty much my journey vlog of a sort, and me talking about how I achieved that and where I'm going forward. But today I wanted to go into a question that one of my partners, Antonio, whom you might have seen on this channel, is one of my business partners for real estate investing. He essentially was asking about creative financing and how exactly you find that. So today, just so you all know what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be going into lease options, subject to seller financing, novation agreements, which is basically partnering with the seller, house hacking, wholesaling, and hard money. So if you want, I'm going to be going in that order. You can follow along and skip to wherever you need to skip to in the video. The first strategy we're going to be talking about today is the lease option strategy, which a lot of you actually have already heard of, just in a different name, which is rent to own. But a lease option has multiple different forms of it versus just simply rent to own, where you can obligate the purchaser to buy the property, or there's no obligation later, or you can change around the lease terms and all that, flexible options. Oftentimes, these are generally considered like, about 6 months to a year, sometimes as far as 3 years, but you can make lease options that actually do last longer than that. The thing about this is you don't actually own the property in this scenario. You actually control the property. Tenants actually control the property in various different aspects. There's actually a bunch of different categories of ownership of a property. And when you lease to a tenant, they actually own some of those categories, we're going to call it, some of those ownership rights, and that's the reason why you have to give them notice before you go into the house, or you have to formally evict them, because they actually own rights to the property. Well, lease to own essentially is the exact same thing. You own rights to the property, and maybe even rights to sublease the property, and this would allow you to say rent to own and then Airbnb it, or rent to own and rooming house it, or some other creative strategy that would work. Or maybe the seller just didn't want to rent it at all, and now you're just going to rent it for them essentially. But this would be a way for you to control the property. You can rent it, make those payments, and then oftentimes you can purchase it at a later date for a much higher price than they normally would have been able to sell it for. Or at this point, maybe your payments are being paid down. You can also do this through a servicer. If the person is behind on their payments, you can kind of get them caught up through a servicer, and it'll take that debt off of their books. We'll go into that into later videos and more in depth. But the long story short is you don't own the property in this style strategy. The seller still owns it. They still have the deed to the property, but you control the property. And a lot of times, control is just as good as owning it when you're making money. So the second option I wanted to go into as far as creative financing is the subject to. So subject to, essentially all it is, just to really dumb it down here, you just simply are transferring the deed of the house, but you're not actually transferring the existing loan on the house. So normally in subject to deals, in fact in all subject to deals generally, there is a loan on the house. Oftentimes you're finding a seller who is in a distressful situation. That loan is too large and they're trying to get out of it. Well, this allows you to kind of take over the payments of the loan, but the loan remains in their name. All right, but the deed is transferred to you. So now you actually own the property in this scenario, but they still own the debt. Now, this can cause a couple of different questions, like, for example, the most common one is due on sale clauses. Will that trigger that? Technically, yes, but most banks don't actually care about this. So as long as the payments are being made, very, very rarely does a bank actually care about this. And if they actually did, then you can use lease option strategies to kind of get around this. But ultimately, subject to is just simply that. It allows you to just take over those payments. You can use those payments as your kind of guiding ground for how you're going to rent it going forward. Once again, using some creative strategies, or there's a lot of mortgages actually that are so low that you could just rent it normally and you'd be perfectly fine. And the seller just simply didn't do that because they don't want to rent the property out. A lot of people really aren't cut out for property management. So this is the key. This one is often intertwined with seller financing, which I'm going to go into next. But the key important difference is there is a mortgage on the property for this one, whereas in seller financing, there often is not a loan on the property. So we're going to go into that one next. But with subject to, mainly that's about it. It's just simply put, you're taking over those payments, you're deeding it over, you own the property for all intents and purposes. So let's go into seller financing next and talk about some of the key differences there. So the next one is going to be seller financing, which is essentially the seller becomes the bank. What does that mean? Well, I actually heard an example once about a car. I think is probably an easy example for a lot of people to understand. Essentially, you almost look at it as let's say you have a car that's worth $10,000 according to, let's say, Kelley Blue Book, and yet you want to sell it for $15,000, and you can't. If you listed at that price, you would not be able to get your $15,000. No one is going to acknowledge it. But if instead you said you were willing to accept payments on the car, you give them the car, but then you accept payments on that car instead, and up to a certain time when they've actually paid that $15,000, a lot more people would be open to this. This is actually what banks do all the time. They know you can't afford a $300,000 house, and so therefore they are willing to give you that house as long as you make payments to them. So it's the same thing. The seller is becoming the bank. So there are a lot of different situations on why a seller would want to do this. We're not going to go into this in detail today, but it is actually more common than you might realize. In fact, a lot of these are more common than you might realize. A lot of the times you don't notice people using these strategies, mostly because you're not using them yourself. Sort of to keep with the car example, when you're driving on the road and you're driving your own specific car, your Ford Focus or whatever, now you see them everywhere. Like when you start driving a Tesla, you see Teslas all over the place. So essentially, it kind of works the same way here. You haven't been using these strategies, so you think they're rare, but they actually are very common. Seller financing is very common. 33% of all of the houses in the nation, or actually a little bit more than that, are all paid off. They have no mortgages on them. There are a ton of options for this type of strategy, and they simply just don't want to sell their house at the price other people are willing to pay. Why maybe other people are not willing to pay this? It's possible that the house is way too overpriced. They just really want this specific number, sort of in the car example, the $15,000, where no one will pay more than 10 because that's what the comps say that it should be worth. Kelley Blue Book in our example. But there could be other reasons. Maybe it's distressed, but they don't want to sell it for 60 cents on the dollar like a wholesaler would need it. Because remember, a wholesaler has to fit in their fees, then fit in transaction costs and all of that. So it's going to start to eat up on that. And then when a wholesaler tries, to get it from them, they need to bring them down that price, and they're not willing to budge. Seller financing is a way you can get around that. Once again, you own the property. You could deed it over and then simply have a note on the property. But a lot of times there are variations of it where you don't own the property. It's more like the lease option where you control the property, which is honestly just as good because as long as you're making payments. So the next one I'm going to go into is a Novation Agreement. The easiest way to say this is partnering with the seller. This is actually one that I have done. I've actually done this now twice. So this one, so subject to and seller financing, I have not actually done one of those deals, but I intend to very soon here. I've done all the other deals as far as that we're going to be going into, but the Novation one here, I've done this. Basically, the easiest way I can say it is that you are partnering with the seller. You're going to renovate the house, all right? You're going to then sell the house for the seller, and then they get whatever number they're trying to reach. So I'm going to give you a real-world example that, as far as number they're trying to reach, as far as the how much money they're going to receive. So my real-world example is I actually, I guess you could say, bought a house. You don't really buy it technically. You have it under contract, kind of locked up, and the seller wanted $100 and I believe $62,000 for it. Well, if I bought it and tried to, let's say, wholesale it or even flip it at $162,000, when the total value of the house at fully fixed up was going to be $240,000, I wouldn't have enough wiggle room based on the renovations required. Okay. Also, I'm in this case, I also didn't want to finance the property. I actually already had a lot of financing going around, and so I didn't want to finance anymore just in this particular situation. Now, this is a key benefit here. With me partnering with the seller, we can negotiate where they continue to pay the mortgage payments up to a certain number of months. I then have to buy it after that certain number of months at their agreed upon price of $162,000. I'm not worried about it because I know I'm going to beat it too close. I'm going to sell it to someone else anyway. And then once I renovate it, I sell it to an end buyer. Now, a lot of you who are already familiar with wholesaling, which we're about to go into in the next one here, the wholesaling, it's going to sound like an assignment, right? Like you're putting a property under contract and you sell the assignment to somebody else. Well, the problem is you can't sell an assignment contract to a realtor whom is going to represent an end buyer. The realtor is going to need to add in all of their own terms and agreements and all of the stuff like that. And when they take a wholesale contract, which is essentially an assignment to purchase, they have to accept the terms you made with that seller. Well, what do wholesalers often do? They put in a lot of terms like, we'll close in like 14 days, and yeah, we'll pay all the closing costs, and we'll do this and that all for you. Well, a realtor's not going to accept that. In fact, a lot of buyers don't pay closing costs, especially for like the realtor and stuff. Now the seller's got to agree to these new terms, so they can't use your contract. This is where a novation comes into play. Okay, a novation allows them to change the terms within the contract to meet their new conditions. Of course, your original contract still stays in place. So that means the seller still has to agree, honor the agreement with you, but now honor the new terms dictated by this realtor, which you would get a power of attorney to force the seller into a position to accept it. This would all be negotiated ahead of time, but what is it that I save money on, all right? Why is it that I couldn't just wholesale it, but now I can do this? I don't have any transaction fees because I never actually bought the house, so it saves all the transactions to purchase the property before I start renovating and then sell it again, right? So none of that. Financing costs. I didn't have to finance the property. The property is already still in the seller's name. I didn't have to buy it or anything like that. And even if I really wanted to, I could negotiate terms where I pay the mortgage up until the point of the sale. So this is a strategy you can use to flip properties to end buyers without actually buying it. And then all you would need in this circumstance is usually maybe some private money or your own money to actually do the renovation. Remember, because you don't have a hard money loan, which we're going to get into in this video, or any other type of bank financing, you have to fund somehow that renovation cost. This is why usually this is done on, like, let's say, kind of cosmetic flips, unless you have a lot of money to do it on a gut renovation. So before we actually go into wholesaling, I want to talk about house hacking really quick. That was actually in the order I mentioned in the beginning of the video. House hacking, very simply, is purchasing an investment property with a primary residency loan. It's nothing more complicated than that, essentially. This sounds like mortgage fraud, and it's not. Remember, the terms of the loan of a primary residency loan is that you must live in it, and not even that you must intend to live in it for a year. Life circumstances happen, so being a year or not is really kind of variable, and it depends on how you'd like to think of it. But let's go ahead and say you're just going to live in it for a year. Well, the thing is, when you purchase with a house hack strategy, oftentimes you can use what I used, a VA loan, or what other people use, an FHA loan or USDA loan, or all these other different low down payment loans to control a property for very cheap. Now, a lot of people associate this with rooming houses. You do not have to do a rooming house. This can be like 7 different types of methods, which I talk about in another video of mine of 7 different types of house hacks. So you can do this in a lot of different ways with apartment complexes, Airbnbs, duplex conversion, where you cut the house in half and you rent off the other part. There's a lot of different ways to make this work, but essentially you are using a primary residency loan to control an investment property. Why do I say an investment property? Because you intend to move out of it. Okay, eventually you're going to want to move out of the property, and you either want to live and flip it, which is a type of house hack in my opinion, or you want to hold on to it, and therefore the deal must work after you leave. And generally with these low down payment style loans, you are having a higher mortgage, which is why rooming houses are so popular with this model, because it generates the most income. So just keep that in mind. Yes, technically, I'm calling it an investment property, and by the terms of the primary residency loan, you're not supposed to do an investment property, but it doesn't have to be one while you're living in it. It just is. You make money on it. You're not paying rent. You know, a lot of times I say this is one of the best ways to start off in real estate, mostly because it's basically real estate on training wheels. A lot of these loans are often going to be used on houses that are already fixed up. You don't have to do anything to the house. And then you are reducing your rent to 0, and many times, most often, making cash flow on top of it. Plus appreciation and depreciation. You're getting both of those benefits, tax depreciation. And you're still getting mortgage principal pay down, tax reductions on interest. This is a fantastic strategy to start you off, so that way you no longer have expenses like rent and make more money on top of it. Now, let's go into wholesaling extremely briefly. Many of you have already heard of it. There's lots of wholesaling videos out there. But essentially, what you are doing is you are putting a property under contract. Okay, so you're saying, I'm going to buy this, but then you instead sell that contract to purchase it to another person. So instead, you're flipping a contract, not the house itself. So the beauty about doing this is theoretically it takes no money to do so. It takes no money to actually put something under contract and then sell it to somebody else. However, you will have to find the deal, and oftentimes that does require a lot of time and money. So just be aware of that it's not truly no money down, but it almost is. Now, a lot of wholesalers or people that I buy from all the time, this is the off-market deals, which I often refer to off-market as off the MLS. But just keep in mind, they really are a new market in and of itself, and not every wholesale deal is actually a good one. So if you intend to buy one, oftentimes you're going to have to use normal bank strategies, or the next one we're going to talk about, hard money, in order to actually purchase them. In fact, most often hard money or private money. And but if you do it yourself, you can make an easy, quick 10 to 20 grand by flipping this contract to somebody else. Why would someone pay you 10 to 20 grand for a contract, or even more than that? To be honest, many of them have. I've paid as much as $50,000 for a contract. And it goes even higher than that. Essentially, it's all about the math. Okay, most investors work on a very simple formula. The ARV, the after repair value of the house, all right, then multiply that by about 70%. Some people it's 60%. So we'll say 60% minus the renovation costs. Okay, so whatever those renovation costs would be, so you're going to have to be good at analyzing that. And then that is the price the investor will buy it for. Well, if you can get it for less than that, that means all of that wiggle room is your assignment fee. So that's how you make all that money. That's the reason that they would want to do it, because they're going to buy it. They're happy. The seller's going to buy it. They sold it on like 60 cents on the dollar. In this case, like 50, 40 cents on the dollar. And, once again, a lot of people might ask, why would someone do this? It's all about desperation. It's all about seeing what the situation is. In Baltimore, we have tons of these homes with that kind of an inventory level of many homes that people are willing to wholesale or get rid of. The sellers are willing to get rid of it on pennies on the dollar, and that gives you a lot of money as the wholesaler. But once again, you don't actually control the property. This is more of a flip like the Novation strategy. And the last one I want to get into is hard money. Hard money is essentially institutions that are not banks. A lot of times they get sources of funding from not themselves. A lot of people think hard money lenders have the money themselves. They often don't. They actually have it from other investors. But essentially, they lend you all the money you need to actually purchase and close on the property. However, keep in mind, all hard money lenders are different. Their terms are different. But here's the most average terms, okay? A lot of times, it's a 6-month term, which means you have to pay them back within 6 months. 6 months to a year. Some will give you a year. And then essentially you got to pay all that money back that they gave you. They're going to usually do up to 80% of the purchase price. So there is some money on your side involved, but not that much. And they're going to do 100% of the reno costs with you paying for it up front and then giving them proof that it was done. A lot of hard money lenders are very familiar with the real estate process. They know how to analyze a deal. And in fact, that's why they're even involved. They represent someone who understands what you're doing for the investor who's giving them all the money to invest their money with. So a lot of times that's actually how they operate. There are tons of hard money lenders. These people are not rare. Like literally just Google them all over the place. Hard money lenders make money by your transactions. So every time you make a transaction, they get an origination fee. That's how they make their money to do what they're doing. And then they set you up with a note. A lot of times these notes will be off of your personal books, which is great if you're thinking about house hacking more properties and such. But just keep in mind of what hard money is. I have used hard money not a dozen, but a bunch of times. Most of the time I'm actually using other strategies. But the way you pay them back is generally to cash out refinance. All right, you cash out refinance the property at the end of the entire renovation. Another bigger bank comes in, maybe like a community bank or something. They swoop in, they pay off the loan, and then pay, they give you your money back for everything you needed, to pay them back with. So anyway, that's pretty much it for all the different creative strategies that are most commonly used. If you are thinking that these strategies are rare, trust me, they are actually more common than a lot of traditional purchases as far as making a deal work. They are a lot more common than you think. And you want to think of this as all tools in your toolbox. The more tools you have, the better off you'll be in finding these deals and acquiring them. So anyway, if you have any questions, let me know. Comment below, and I will talk to you all very soon.